podcast where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to robotic facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation. Today, we are focused on something that, frankly, is draining hundreds of thousands of dollars from the average producer's bank account, maybe without them even seeing the specific entry on the ledger. We're talking about herd health failure.
And today, we're diving deep into a feature piece that's been generating some serious buzz across the industry. This isn't just a technical article, you know. This one's got layers and some hard, surprising truths, really. It's going to force farmers, especially those who are struggling to break even, to fundamentally rethink how they approach cow care, specifically around that relentless pattern of repeat mastitis cases.
Yeah, we all know that frustrating pattern, don't we? The cow that gets treated seems better, maybe for a bit, only to flare up again a month later. It really is the definition of insanity on the dairy, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. That cycle, it shrinks your milk check, drives up your antibiotic bill. But what you might not realize is the sheer financial gravity of that situation, not just for your farm, but for the whole industry.
Exactly, and that's precisely why this discussion matters right now. We are at a pivot point, truly. The industry is facing simultaneous, really intense pressures. On one side, you've got regulatory mandates, some here, some coming, demanding lower antibiotic use. Big concerns over resistance there. On the other side, you have poor, sometimes even negative economic returns when sticking to those traditional costly treatments that, well, they just don't deliver lasting solutions. You're losing money, and pretty soon, you might not even be allowed to treat the same way anyway.
The stakes here are truly astronomical. We pulled the research, looked at Wageningen University and the Dutch Agricultural Ministry data, and the figures are just staggering. Their analysis suggests that, collectively, the U.S. dairy industry is dealing with $2.7 billion national hit. It's billion with a B. All in hidden losses tied to these chronic herd health failures. Now, a number that big, it almost becomes meaningless, right? It's just abstract big data.
It is abstract, yeah, until you translate it directly to the farm gate. And that's what we need to do. If you're running a standard, say, 200-cow operation, that huge national loss breaks down directly into an almost invisible but constant financial drag on your business. The modeling shows this hidden cost can easily top $160,000 a year for an average performing herd.
$160,000. Wow. That is immediate measurable capital just evaporating. And where's it going? It's lost milk that gets dumped down the drain. It's those premature culls that force you to buy expensive replacements you weren't planning for. And it's the sheer wasted labor time, day after day, spent dealing with the sick pen, treating chronic issues that frankly never seem to fully resolve. That figure, $160,000. Well, that's the difference between surviving a tough year and maybe having the capital to buy that new piece of equipment or pay down some debt. It's huge.
And here is where we get into the controversy, because this massive quantifiable financial failure, it fundamentally challenges conventional wisdom. We've all been trained, probably since we were kids helping out, to hit clinical mastitis hard, 100% of the time, right, with a course of broad-spectrum antibiotics. But if that protocol actually worked as well as we thought, why are we collectively losing $2.7 billion? The answer, it seems, lies in the science of these bacterial fortresses and understanding why our traditional, tried and true antibiotic tools simply cannot breach those walls effectively. We are essentially fighting a modern war with old technology.
Okay, let's really unpack that $160,000 price tag, because that's the number that should keep producers up at night. We've established the failure rate is high. Studies coming out of places like the University of Wisconsin, Cornell, they're consistent. Current traditional mastitis treatments often fail to deliver lasting cures. You get these recurrence rates that just severely undercut profitability. Let's get specific on where those costs pile up.
Right. And this is where the paper trail often goes cold for most farmers because these costs are spread out. They're not one line item. But let's model just a single chronic cow, okay? Let's say you treat her 3 times for clinical mastitis and just 1 lactation. Then you finally cull her because her SCC is just chronically high. Look at the specific costs stacking up for just that one animal.
Okay, first, the drugs themselves. The standard course of intramammary antibiotics. It isn't cheap. Maybe $20 to $40 per dose per quarter, depending. So if you treat her 3 separate times, you've easily spent maybe $100, $120 just on the drug. And that's ignoring any initial diagnostics you might have done.
But honestly, that's the smallest piece of the puzzle. The drug cost is minor compared to the rest. Think about the dumped milk. You're dumping milk for, 7 to 10 days after each treatment? Sometimes longer, depending on the drug and testing. If that cow is a decent producer, maybe 80 pounds a day, and milk is, let's say, $20 a hundredweight, you've lost $16 a day right there. Over 3 treatments, that could be 21, maybe even 30 days of dumped milk. That's easily over $330, maybe $400 in lost revenue per cow, just from milk you couldn't sell. Now multiply that by, say, the 50 to 80 cows in your herd that might experience chronic or repeat mastitis over a year. The milk loss alone starts creeping towards $20,000 or more before you even think about culling.
And then there's the labor. Ugh, this is the hidden monster, isn't it? Every single time you pull a cow into the sick pen, treat her, monitor her, dump her milk separately, clean the equipment, reintroduce her, you're looking at a minimum of 3 to 4 hours of labor, probably more, spread across that week or so. If you value your time or your hired hand's time at, say, $25 an hour, that's easily another $100 per treatment incident in just labor. Repeat it 3 times for that chronic cow. That's $300 in essentially wasted nursing time for one animal that doesn't get better long term.
Right, and you often end up right back where you started, or worse. That's the core frustration for the producer, isn't it? You invest the labor, you invest the supplies, you follow the protocol, and the animal either ends up back in the chronic pen or you just make that hard decision to cull her early. Because the return on that repeated investment just isn't there. That chronic cow becomes the engine driving that huge $160,000 annual loss figure we talked about.
And that's the insidious cycle. We often talk about early culling in terms of lost future production, which is true. But we need to account for the immediate, measurable cash outflow, the replacement cost. It's real money going out the door today. If you have to replace an animal that really should have given you maybe 5, 6 lactations, but she only gave you 2 because of utter health, you now have to spend upwards of $1,800, maybe $2,200 immediately to buy or develop a replacement heifer just to maintain your herd size. That's a huge hit.
And while the financial risk, the total dollar amount, obviously magnifies for a massive 1,000 cow operation where those losses could easily top 7 figures, we really need to stress that it's the percentage loss that is just devastating for smaller farms. A $160,000 loss might represent a manageable risk, maybe for a multi-thousand head herd with deeper pockets, but for a 200 cow family farm operating on already thin margins, that $160K is potentially farm-ending debt that just accumulates year after year. The failure of the old protocol hits everyone, yeah, but it cripples the smaller producer much, much faster.
So we know that traditional antibiotic treatments fail way too often. If the money is bleeding out this badly, why are farmers still so reliant on this method? The industry reality check starts with recognizing that the push away from antibiotics, it isn't just about regulatory pressure anymore, though that's part of it. It's becoming a necessity because the science has fundamentally changed how we view infection, particularly chronic infection.
Yeah, it's recognizing the myth of antibiotic dominance, as some are calling it. For decades, the basic assumption was that if you just hit it hard enough with the right concentration of antibiotics applied aggressively, you could overcome pretty much any infection. We treated bacteria like they were just individual, free-floating, independent cells. Easy targets. But the science, especially the work detailed in our source material, it proves that assumption wrong, especially for chronic infections that have had time to really dig in and set up shop.
And this brings us to the core science that every single producer really needs to understand now. Biofilms and quorum sensing, or QS. We introduced them quickly earlier, but let's go a bit deeper here because it's critical.
Okay, biofilms. They are not just simple fortresses. Think of them as highly structured, self-produced, protective communities the bacteria build around themselves, often deep inside the udder tissue. Imagine, like bacterial high-rise condominiums, completely encased in this thick, slimy polymer shell they manufacture themselves. The sources refer to this structure technically as an extracellular polymeric substance, or EPS matrix. It's basically bacterial slime armor.
And that EPS matrix, that slime armor, is the key failure point for our traditional treatments, isn't it? This slimy, sticky shield is made of stuff like polysaccharides and proteins. It does two critical things. First, it physically blocks the antibiotic molecule. Like a wall, it prevents it from even reaching the bacteria huddled inside. Second, the matrix itself can act as kind of a neutralizing agent. It can absorb or even chemically inactivate the drug before it penetrates the colony. So once these biofilms are really established, they're virtually impenetrable to standard antibiotics at normal therapeutic doses.
Exactly. And then you add quorum sensing on top of that. This is the sophisticated internal messaging system the bacteria use to communicate within that fortress. We're talking about chemical signals, specific molecules, often called autoinducers, that they release into their local environment. They basically use these signals to take a census. They don't launch a major attack or build the thickest fortress walls until they reach a certain population density, until they achieve a quorum.
Wait, that part about density is fascinating. They aren't just sitting there passively, they're actively monitoring their numbers. So once they realize, hey, there are enough of us now, we've reached the quorum, that's when they coordinate their defenses. That's when they launch a synchronized virulence attack, producing toxins, and crucially, ramp up production of that protective EPS matrix, that sticky antibiotic-proof fortress wall.
That's precisely it. And that is the critical failure point of regular antibiotics when dealing with these established infections. Sure, the antibiotic might kill some of the free-floating bacteria, the planktonic ones, the individuals who haven't joined the fortress yet. Maybe it knocks the population back temporarily. But they typically do not break this bacterial communication chain. They don't disrupt the quorum sensing system. They leave the coordinating command structure and the protective fortress wall largely intact. So the moment that antibiotic concentration drops below effective levels, the remaining bacteria, still protected by their EPS matrix, just regroup, start communicating again, and reestablish the infection, which leads directly to that inevitable recurrence. You only treated the symptom, maybe knocked back the fire temporarily, but you didn't address the underlying cause, the coordinated bacterial community.
Okay, so why did it take this long then for the dairy industry to really integrate this understanding? I mean, biofilm science isn't brand new, is it? Why are we only now seeing solutions specifically targeted at this mechanism when farmers have apparently been losing this $2.7 billion collectively for decades?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It probably has a few answers. Part of it is likely regulatory inertia. We relied on the broad spectrum approach for so long because, frankly, it was effective enough for many acute early infections. It seemed to work, mostly. Part of it is the cost and complexity of R&D. Developing targeted non-antibiotic solutions based on disrupting communication, that's complex biological work. But the sources strongly suggest that the combined pressure of regulatory phase-outs of certain key antibiotics, plus this really catastrophic financial data like those wagoning numbers hitting the headlines, finally forced the smart money, the innovators, to look seriously for solutions that don't just rely on chemical overpowering. They needed something smarter.
Right. If the problem is sophisticated communication and coordinated defense, then the solution has to be about causing communication failure. Makes sense. This is where these targeted treatments, specifically quorum sensing inhibition or QSI technology, are really starting to gain traction. Companies like AHV International are mentioned as pioneers in this space, specifically targeting that bacterial communication system itself.
And this is where the deeper science is so critical for our listeners to grasp. QSI is not an antibiotic. Let's be perfectly clear on that. It doesn't necessarily kill the bacteria directly through chemical poisoning like an antibiotic does. Instead, it works by mimicking or jamming the bacteria's own signaling molecules. Think of it less like radiostatic, maybe, and more like inserting a nonsense phrase right into the middle of a complex military command chain. It scrambles the message.
So by introducing these specific inhibitory compounds, and it sounds like in some cases they're modeled after natural antagonists found in plants or other microbes like certain pheromones, the QSI literally jumbles the bacterial messages. The bacteria basically can no longer accurately determine their own density. They can't coordinate their defense effectively, and they certainly can't launch that synchronized virulent attack. They lose the ability to properly build and maintain the structural integrity of the biofilm fortress.
Exactly. By disrupting that coordinated defense, the bacteria are essentially reverted back to behaving like individual disorganized cells again, less like an army, more like a confused mob. They can no longer hold their formation, the biofilm structure weakens, it starts to dissolve or become porous, and that is the crucial moment. That disruption allows the cow's own natural, healthy immune defenses, the white blood cells, the macrophages, to finally step in effectively. They can now penetrate the weakened stronghold, break down the remaining bacteria, and clear the infection properly, often without needing that high-dose chemical intervention we relied on before.
So it's really about empowering the cow's existing defenses. It's working with the animal's biology, not just trying to overpower the infection with chemicals that the bacteria have already, in many cases, learned how to defeat or shield themselves from.
But, and this is a really important, but here's the practical context. It's crucial. QSI, or any targeted technology like it, is not a magic bullet. It won't fix a poorly managed farm. The source material is absolutely adamant about this. This targeted approach must be paired with solid foundational dairy management. If your cows are walking around and muck up to their hocks, if your feed program is deficient in key immune-supporting vitamins and minerals, or if your heat abatement strategy is inadequate, well, no amount of fancy QI technology is going to magically save you.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more of an efficiency tool for the cow's immune system. It takes your existing good management, things like cleaner, drier barn environments, optimized feeding that really supports overall immune function, tighter dry cow care protocols, and it elevates the effectiveness of that management against these tougher chronic challenges. But if you're not managing well in the first place, the investment in these targeted treatments will probably just be wasted money.
Precisely. You need both parts of the equation. Good management provides the foundation. Targeted tech helps overcome specific hurdles like biofilms.
Okay, let's circle back and talk about the uncomfortable truth buried in the economics here. Because this is where the tension between tradition and, well, profit truly hits home. Our sources touch on what some call the dirty secret of the traditional vet model. Not all vets, of course, but the structure itself. By nature of its often transaction-based structure, it sometimes inadvertently relies on repeat visits to cover its overhead and be profitable. Is it fair to say they are sometimes incentivized by treatment failure rather than by achieving lasting herd health?
Now, hold on. I wouldn't frame it entirely as malice or intentionally wanting failures. Most vets I know are incredibly dedicated to animal welfare. However, I absolutely see the systemic flaw you're pointing out in the traditional model. It's a structural issue. If your conventional treatment protocol has, say, a known 30 or 40% failure rate for chronic mastitis cases, while that inherently means 30-40% more follow-up calls, 30-40% more treatment supplies purchased from the practice inventory, and 30-40% more billable time spent on that farm dealing with the recurrence. So the traditional model, by its very definition, can incentivize reaction to failure rather than investing heavily in deep-seated prevention or ensuring that first treatment leads to a long-term lasting cure.
Exactly. It's a structural flaw, not necessarily a flaw in the vets themselves. The paradigm shift we're seeing is about moving away from that purely reaction-based economy. The goal of QSI and these similar immune-supportive approaches is really about getting the treatment strategy right the first time, to achieve resolution and prevent recurrence. This immediately cuts down on those repeated visits, dramatically reduces the farmer's own supply and labor costs, and interestingly, it ultimately benefits the progressive vets too. Those who are willing to pivot more towards a consultative model, focusing on prevention and long-term health planning, they build stronger, more profitable long-term relationships with producers who are also more profitable.
And if we connect this potential structural shift directly to the farm's bottom line, the economic modeling presented is incredibly persuasive. The data strongly suggests that farms just sticking to the old antibiotic-heavy protocols, especially for chronic issues, could be losing conservatively $200,000 or more a year compared to operations that are proactively adopting these new targeted immune-focused protocols. That difference.
Yeah.
It isn't just a minor profit margin tweak. It's becoming a significant competitive gulf. And in a sustained low milk price environment, that gulf could easily put traditionalists out of business.
Yeah, and nothing hammers home that financial impact quite like the economics of culling. Let's look closely at that example mentioned, Peter Smith in the Northeast. He focused heavily on implementing these immune-supporting protocols across his herd. The results on culling were dramatic. He went from culling roughly 1 in 3 cows, primarily for udder health issues, down to culling only 1 in 7 for those same reasons in just a few years.
That's immense. Let's just break down what saving those cows actually looks like on the balance sheet for, say, that typical 200 cow farm we discussed. Going from a 33% cull rate specifically for udder issues, that's about 66 cows leaving the herd prematurely each year, down to a 14% rate, which is around 28 cows. That means he prevented nearly 40 cows from being culled early just by addressing udder health more effectively. 40 cows saved per year.
Okay, so 40 cows saved. Now, if we assume the average cost to either develop or purchase a replacement heifer is around $2,000, and you're right, many producers probably underestimate this figure when they factor in feed, labor, breeding costs, and risk. Saving those 40 cows translates pretty directly to an $80,000 immediate avoidance of cash outflow just on replacement costs alone. That's huge.
Plus, think about which cows you are retaining. You're keeping mature cows in their second, third, fourth lactation. These are animals hitting their peak production years. When you cull one of those animals early due to a chronic issue, you're not only spending $2,000 on a heifer that won't reach peak production herself for another 18 months or so, but you are also sacrificing years of high-volume, high-efficiency milk production from that mature cow you lost. So Peter Smith's overall herd efficiency and profitability improved almost instantly, simply because he was able to retain his high-performing mature animals for longer. This significant shift in the cull rate creates a massive financial swing. It easily justifies the investment in targeted health protocols multiple times over, just on culling alone.
It really highlights the difference between constantly cycling through cheaper, lower-producing heifers versus maximizing the productive lifespan and the inherent efficiency of your most valuable assets, those mature cows.
Exactly. Keep the good ones working longer.
Now, the theory and the economic modeling are powerful, definitely, but the real proof has to be in the data from actual farms making these changes. Let's dive into the results from Trevor Nutcher in the Midwest. This is presented as a massive success story, really showing the potential power of shifting protocols towards immune support and utilizing QSI. Get this, in just 18 months, he achieved an over 95% reduction in antibiotic use, specifically for treating mastitis cases.
95%. Just stop and think about the implications of that for a moment. Not only is he dramatically reducing his regulatory risk exposure and improving the consumer perception of his operation, but his tangible production results are clear evidence that this targeted approach really works on the ground. His bulk tank somatic cell count data showed a drop from around 180,000 down to just over 120,000. That's not just a marginal improvement, Sarah, that's a significant shift. It moves him from being constantly worried about potential quality penalties or regulatory action to operating in a much safer, potentially premium-eligible milk quality tier.
And what I find particularly fascinating in Nutcher's reported data is the ancillary benefit they highlighted. Improved fertility. Makes sense, right? When cows are healthier internally, when their immune system isn't constantly bogged down fighting chronic low-grade inflammation or infection, they breed back faster, more consistently. That 60,000-point drop in SEC likely means less chronic inflammation systemically, less metabolic stress overall, and that translates directly into healthier reproductive cycles. Conception rates improve.
That's the holistic view, exactly. The view that farmers sometimes miss when they're solely focused on the udder as an isolated problem. A chronic inflammation issue, like persistent high SEC, it's not just an udder issue, it becomes a systemic drain on the cow's resources. By resolving that chronic state through these more targeted approaches, you often see performance benefits across the board: milk production, reproduction, maybe even feed efficiency. Furthermore, just think about that SEC drop purely in terms of daily farm labor. Fewer clinical flare-ups mean significantly less time spent identifying cows, separating them, treating them, dumping their milk, cleaning extra equipment. Trevor Nutcher's success isn't just about the money he saved on drugs or lost milk. It's also about a measurable improvement in the quality of life and the labor efficiency on his farm day to day. Less hassle.
That's a great point. We also have the example cited of Joe Soares out west. His operation apparently focused heavily on immune support protocols for some time, and that investment paid off in a really unexpected way when external volatility hit the industry, specifically during the regional outbreak of avian influenza, or bird flu, that impacted some dairies.
Yeah, this is almost the definition of building systemic resilience and mitigating unforeseen risks. It's fascinating. When bird flu hit that region, the report says neighboring farms, maybe those still using more traditional reactive health protocols, suffered steep, sustained drops in milk production as their herds came under stress. But Soares, whose prior investment in robust, proactive immune health meant his cows were already operating at a higher baseline of health and efficiency, his herd was apparently able to weather that storm much better. While neighbor production reportedly tanked, his held relatively steady. That demonstrates an immune focus that goes beyond just the udder. It acts almost like an insurance policy against these unpredictable external pressures.
Exactly. His proactive investment acted as a kind of biological buffer, making his herd more resilient against new environmental challenges or health threats. But, and this is a point the source material reportedly stresses repeatedly, these successes are not magic. They don't just happen by buying a new product. These results come from hard work, from dedication, and from the willingness to meticulously monitor results and adjust protocols to the specific needs of their individual farm.
Right. The technology, like QSI, provides a new pathway, a new tool, but the producer still has to commit to walking that path, adapting the strategy, tweaking things, and monitoring constantly to make it work optimally for them.
Okay, so connecting all this evidence, the economics, the science, the case studies to the bigger picture, it really does feel like the dairy world is splitting right now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We are clearly observing the emergence of two very distinct groups of producers, and the difference between them increasingly seems to be massive, quantifiable profitability and resilience.
Group 1, let's call them the adopters. They're embracing this new science, these targeted approaches, and they're seeing tangible, verifiable benefits. Their cows seem to live longer, they make more milk more efficiently over their lifetimes, their labor costs associated with health issues decline, and critically, they often gain easier access to what the sources call nicer markets. These are likely markets with stringent regulatory requirements or strong consumer demand for certified cleaner production, maybe antibiotic-free milk lines. These markets often offer significant milk quality premiums that the traditionalists simply cannot access.
And then you have Group 2, the traditionalists. Maybe through inertia, maybe skepticism, maybe lack of capital to invest initially. But they risk falling irreversibly behind. The game is clearly evolving. Sticking solely to the old protocols means you are increasingly subjecting your operation to those harsh financial models we talked about, the ones showing $160,000, maybe $200,000 plus, in hidden annual losses compared to the adopters. The cost of sitting still is no longer just theoretical inefficiency. It's becoming a serious competitive disadvantage. And long-term, that disadvantage could very well be farm-ending, especially during downturns.
And this shift isn't just a North American phenomenon, right? The sources mention global trends.
Yeah, most notably in Europe. We're seeing established evidence there where farms have been operating under stricter antibiotic regulations for years. They are successfully using drastically fewer antibiotics overall, while often maintaining or even increasing their production levels per cow. The proof that this targeted proactive paradigm can work effectively at scale, it's not just theoretical anymore. It's been demonstrated over perhaps a decade or more in these highly regulated competitive markets. They figured it out.
So the external pressure is just mounting on all fronts, isn't it?
Right.
Regulations are only going to get tighter, not looser.
Right. Consumer markets increasingly demand cleaner, more transparent production methods. Think responsible use, raised without antibiotics. And frankly, your competition, both down the road and internationally, they are not waiting for you to catch up. They're already implementing these protocols, banking the savings and replacement costs, capturing labor efficiencies, and accessing those premium markets.
So what does this all boil down to for the producer listening to this right now? The final, maybe provocative thought is this. The cost of sitting still, of sticking with only the traditional methods for chronic issues, is not just theoretical inefficiency anymore. It is being modeled consistently at over $200,000 a year for an average farm, maybe more. And if that leak isn't addressed, well, it looks like a direct line towards potential insolvency over time. The smart money, it seems, is betting on those producers who are asking the really hard questions about their current treatment failure rates, their call rates for health issues, and who are actively embracing science-backed solutions that work with the cow's biology, not just against the bacteria.
Well said. It's about evolving or risking being left behind. #tag actionable insights segment.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground. The $2.7 billion national problem, the science of EPS matrix and biofilms, the limitations of traditional antibiotics, and the potential of QSI. Now let's bring it right back home. Let's say a farmer just finished morning milking, they're jumping in the truck, driving to the feed store, listening to this. They need a plan. What are the 3 essential takeaways, the action items they need to consider implementing, broken down by a practical timeline?
Okay, immediate action, like this week or next. Upgrade diagnosis. Seriously, you absolutely need to know exactly who you're dealing with bacteriologically. Stop the generalized shotgun application of treatments for every mastitis case. Invest in better, maybe more rapid diagnostic methods for identifying infections, whether that's on-farm culturing, sending more samples for PCR testing, whatever fits your system, but get the info. This ensures that any treatment you choose, whether it's still a traditional antibiotic for an acute case or a targeted QSI approach for a chronic one, is precisely focused. If you don't know the specific pathogen causing the problem, you're not really treating, you're just guessing. And that guessing, as we've established, costs you potentially $160,000 a year or more. Start with better info.
Okay, that's fundamental. Can't use targeted tech without targeted info. Makes perfect sense. What about medium-term strategy, say over the next 3 to 6 months?
Medium term. Targeted protocol implementation. This means actively starting to explore and integrate some of these targeted treatments into your protocols where appropriate. Look seriously at QSI technology for those chronic high SCC cows, or maybe for fresh cow protocols. Implement truly selective dry cow therapy based on end-of-lactation diagnostics and cow history. No more blanket dry cow therapy across the entire herd if it's not needed. That saves money and reduces overall antibiotic use right there. Or, critically, take this time to significantly bump up your herd nutrition program, specifically to aggressively support immune function. Focus especially during those high-stress transition periods like calving and early lactation. Make sure your vitamin E, your selenium, your zinc, copper, other key trace minerals that prime the immune system, make sure those levels are absolutely optimal. Nutrition is foundational.
Right. Build that baseline resilience. Good. And then long-term positioning, thinking out over the next 1 to 2 years.
Long-term positioning is about strategic change management. Look, change takes guts, and practically it demands bandwidth from you and your team. So pick a dedicated time for major implementation shifts when your crew isn't already completely burned out. Maybe late winter or early spring, as suggested, when the pressures of summer breeding, heat stress, or harvest might be lower. Develop a clear written plan for the changes you want to make. Seek out good coaching or veterinary advice from people who actually understand these newer protocols and the science behind them. And crucially, acknowledge that what works beautifully on Peter Smith's farm in the Northeast or Trevor Nutcher's in the Midwest must be adapted specifically to your individual barn design, your labor structure, your herd genetics, your management style, and your specific challenges. It is absolutely not a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all solution. You have to tailor it.
That adaptation point is so key, isn't it? You have to build your health protocol around your farm's management reality, not try to force your reality to fit some generic protocol.
Couldn't agree more. Tailoring is essential for success. #, enhance show outro. Well, this has been another deep dive from the Bullvine podcast. Today, we really focused on how we might finally start to address those massive hidden costs and the structural flaws in some of our traditional herd health protocols, mainly by embracing targeted science like QSI. If this kind of impartial, data-driven analysis helps your operations stay competitive, stay profitable, head over to www.thebullvine.com. There are more articles there that really try to tell you what's really happening in the dairy industry.
And seriously, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're putting out episodes twice weekly now, aiming to keep you ahead of the curve. And trust me, you definitely don't want to miss what we've got coming next week. We'll be talking about the evolving standards in milk quality premiums. Specifically, we'll be examining how these new consumer-driven demands for things like responsible antibiotic use certificates are actually creating entirely new, potentially high-value markets. Markets that, frankly, only the most progressive producers, the ones already making these kinds of shifts we discussed today, will likely be able to access. It's about future-proofing your market access. We'll see you next time.